I'm going to call the November 20, 2024 Williamsburg Planning Commission meeting to order. Heather, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Hamilton?
Here.
Mr. Tarley?
Here.
Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Ms. Bowe? Mr. Granger?
Here.
Ms. Liebel?
Here.
Mr. Phillips?
Okay, thank you. We have a motion. We need a motion to allow Mr. Phillips to appear virtually due to a family emergency in South Carolina. Is there a motion to approve that?
I so moved.
Is there a second?
I second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Phillips, can you hear us? We'll move on. Our next item is the approval of the minutes from our meeting of October 16. Are there any edits to the minutes as they are currently submitted on the website? If not, then I will ask, is there a motion to approve the minutes of October 16, 2024 as submitted?
So moved. Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley? Aye. Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the open forum. This is an opportunity for anyone to come and speak to the commission on matters that are not separately listed on the agenda. Is there anyone who would like to speak during the open forum? Yes, sir. Please step up to the podium and give the clerk your name and address, please.
My name is Robert Wilson of 22 The Palisades of the city. In February 2022, William & Mary advised members of the City Council that they projected that the college had 4,336 undergraduate beds and estimated that 67% of undergrads would live on campus. Since that time, Old Dominion and Brown have gone offline, leaving about 4,200 beds on campus. While the on-campus housing and parking infrastructure has been shrinking, the undergraduate student population has been growing. The William & Mary website reveals that the undergraduate student population has grown to over 6,887 undergraduate students in the fall of 2023, an increase of 756 undergraduate students, or over 12% in the last 3 years. This means that there are 2,676 undergraduate students now living off campus. At a rate of 3 students per residential unit, these students are occupying 892 residential units in the city that could otherwise be available for affordable housing for our young professionals and city workers. If the goal in 2022 was for 67% of undergraduate students to live on campus, then the current enrollment in student housing falls short by 413 beds, or an equivalent of 137 residential units. There has been no new net on-campus parking to accommodate the increase in the undergraduate enrollment. Total enrollment over the last 10 years, last fall was 9,762, an increase of 1,386 students over the last 10 years. This situation will only get worse for the city residents once the new integrated science building is completed next year. College policies designed for the benefit of the college further create problems for city residents. The college charges students over $500 to park their cars on campus, driving many students to seek parking outside the campus on city streets. The college policy to close on-campus parties at 11 p.m. drives students to hold their parties off campus in our communities. I remember when my children were college students, they generally didn't go out to parties till 10 o'clock. Completion of the current dorms under construction doesn't solve the problem, as their capital plan shows further dorm shutdowns as these are completed. So that brings us to the current development proposal for the former Wells Fargo facility, 1000 Richmond Road. Another attempt to solve the city's housing infrastructure problem by the city. And while a dozen units or so doesn't seem like a major issue, this development is located near a residential community that will bear the brunt of student late-night parties, loud music, and overflow parking. Members of this commission, I want you to imagine these late-night parties, loud music, and in front of your house. What would your position be then? Are you prepared to inflict this on your neighbors? I, like many of you, are an alumni of the college and have feelings of loyalty and fidelity to the institution. However, on these development matters, we have to take our hat off, our William Mary hats off, and wear the hat of the Williamsburg community. We have absolutely no say over what the college decides with respect to their student enrollment or on-campus housing and parking infrastructure. The college has not reached out to the community to understand our concerns and to seek to address them. However, when matters like today's proposal come before us, we should use these opportunities to signal to William & Mary that change is needed. We in the community need to be heard. The staff report makes no specific recommendations for protections for the adjoining residential community, such as buffering, noise or music restrictions, commercial and business hour restrictions, and street parking restrictions. Are we going to sacrifice another of our communities on the altar of William & Mary's ill-planned growth strategy? Reject this proposal and all like it until the college comes to grip with its problem and not seek to continually foist them upon the Williamsburg community. I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. So that proposal is actually PCR 24-026, and there will be a separate forum for that. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to say during the open forum about something other than what's already on the agenda? Okay. Please come forward and state your name and address for the clerk.
Ruth Kaiser. I live at 609 Richmond Road. I am thrilled that you spoke about what you did say, because I have been mulling this over for years and it's just keeping me awake at night. And I mentioned it at City Council, and I think planning needs to, for the sake of peace and community, I think planning also needs to address the city's rescue of the college's off-campus housing students. And what I mean by that is, I don't know whether the city was, whether somebody in the city actively decided that we as the city would solve the off-campus housing crisis, or whether it was just a passive, little nibble by little nibble by little nibble, and all of a sudden there are hundreds of students, actually thousands of students living off campus in town. And I agree with what the previous speaker mentioned, and that is now the city is talking about workforce housing / affordable housing and parking problems, and all these things actually stem from the fact that we have about 50% of these 10,000 students living in houses that used to be single-family residences. We're talking about maybe having an independent school district. There are no kids in town. There are no kids in town because there are no families. And you look around and we're all aging. The way to get the city's quality back as a wonderful place to live, not just to visit, a wonderful place to live, not just to come as a student, a wonderful place to live and raise your family, is to become very proactive about the off-campus housing. And you have to convince those of us that live here that when you say that, you mean it.
Thank you, Ms. Kaiser. Anyone else for the open forum? Dr. Cranbuell, I think you're going to talk about are you going to talk about the proposal that's on the agenda? Yeah, let's put all that together so the clerk doesn't get it, doesn't have trouble organizing. Anything else, anybody that would like to speak about anything that is not already on the agenda? Okay, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and there will be time for you to address the specific applications we have for today. That brings us to a consent agenda item, SPR 24-016. It's on the consent agenda, meaning there's not a presentation or a discussion unless a member of the commission wants to remove it. And we learned how at our last meeting we learned how to do that, because we rarely do. Does anyone want to remove that? Okay. Is there a motion then to approve SPR 24-016 as submitted?
I so move.
Approve. Oh, go ahead.
I'll
I'll
second.
second it.
Okay.
Okay.
Aye. Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Mr. Phillips?
Aye.
Good. Okay, thank you. So that brings us to our public hearings that are scheduled for today. The first one is PCR 24-026. Ms. Griffin, the floor is yours.
Mr. Boswell, before we proceed, I'm going to recuse myself from participation in PCR number 24-026. In the past, I've had a long attorney-client relationship with the applicant, and even though I don't have one now, I think recusal is the appropriate thing to do. And at the recommendation of Assistant City Attorney Lambert, I will step away from the dais for the discussion of this particular
Thank you, Mr.
agenda.
Charlie. You have anything to say? No. Ms. Griffin?
Yes, I apologize because I have put these out of order. So let me go through here and get to PCR 2426. This is a request of Demetrius Florakis for a special use permit to allow multifamily dwellings at 1006 Richmond Road and to allow maximum density of 14 dwelling units per net acre. This permit will facilitate the adaptive rehabilitation of the building with the first floor as commercial and the second and third floors as multifamily with 11 apartments. Just trying to make sure I'm at the right thing. Here we go. So the property is shown there. And then just to make everyone understand, the LB2 district does not allow multifamily dwellings by right. It is required to get a special use permit regardless of the density. The base density here is 8 units per net acre. The property is approximately 0.796 acres, which equates to 6 units at 8 units per acre. The applicant is requesting a special use permit because the zoning ordinance does allow them to request that there will be 14 units per net acre. So that's 0.796 acres times 14, which equals 11 units. In the application, what you do find is that there was a conceptual drawing that went to the ARB. In that conceptual drawing, he's showing retail space. Retail space is allowed in the LB2 district, and so the Planning Commission is not looking at today the retail space because retail space would not come before the Planning Commission or City Council. It is allowed by right in this district. So today the focus is on the multifamily dwelling units that are allowed by special use permit. The applicant is requesting, as I said, 11 units. 4 of those units will be studios on the second floor. 2 of those units on the second floor would be 1 bedrooms, and 1 of those bedrooms would have handicap accessibility. On the third floor, there are 5 one-bedroom units for a total of 11 units. Anytime we're looking at a special use permit, the zoning ordinance requires us to look at 6 specific criteria. The first is if the use is in harmony with the adopted comprehensive plan. The second is if the use is in harmony with the intent and purpose of the zoning district. And then the third is if the use is in harmony with the character of adjacent properties, surrounding neighborhoods, and with existing and proposed development. This is an excerpt of the land use designation map for the comprehensive plan. This area is at the corner of Richmond Road and Matoaka Court. It is our mixed use land use designation. This provides for flexibility in land uses to be developed at suitable for a mixture of residential and commercial areas. This designation should promote the preservation, revitalization, adaptive reuse where appropriate of existing historic structures. I do want to reiterate that this particular request is for an adaptive reuse. There were some questions about whether this was for demolition. In the application for the ARB, the applicant did put demolition, and we believe that's demolition for the interior, although the ARB does not look at interior demolition. There is no demolition of this building. This would be an adaptive reuse of the building with first floor commercial and second and third floor residential. The LB2 Limited Business Neighborhood District actually implements the land use designation for mixed use, and this particular building is also located in the Arts and Cultural District. This is a zoning map to the left, and the pink area shows the LB2 district. The LB2 allows a range of uses, including single-family and duplex dwellings. It allows banks, bake shops, hotels with 10 or less rooms, museums, art galleries, offices, restaurants, and retail stores. Again, multifamily uses are required to get a special use permit. As I said before, multifamily residential uses are allowed at a base density of 8 and special use 14. And looking at the character of the area, again, it's in the Arts and Cultural District, which was established in 2011. And that district was established to encourage and enhance the city's creative economy as an economic development initiative. Here you have an active corridor with commercial, office, and residential. Surrounding the building are insurance offices, a radio station, restaurants. There's a vacant lot, a student apartment building, and just blocks away in the rear of this is a Matoaka Court area, and then you also have Midtown Row further up the street. Also looking at character, again, there's changing uses here. He's only asking to change the second and third floors. The fourth and fifth criteria is if the use will adequately be served by essential public services such as streets, drainage facilities, fire protection, and public water and sewer facilities. And then number 5, will the proposed use not destroy or create any loss or damage to significant ecological, scenic, or historical importance. I can say that number 5 has been reached. He's not changing anything to the exterior, only anything to the actual property. The only thing that will change is the exterior and the inside of the property. There are no ecological, scenic, or historic importance to the particular property. And number 6, will the proposed use be designed, sited, and landscaped so that the use will not hinder or discourage the appropriate development or use of adjacent properties or surrounding neighborhoods? So let's focus on number 4. Adequately serviced by essential public services. We do know that this is on an active street. There are 2 bus stops within 4 through 5 blocks of this particular property. The proposed residential development, the number of units is 11. The average flow gallons per day is 3,410. The flow duration in hours is a 24-hour cycle. The average flow and the peak flow is shown here. We believe that this is adequate and the city has the capacity to withstand the 11 units here. And looking at parking, this is a change from the staff report that was put online on last week and has been updated today. This particular property is actually in the Midtown Parking District. And the Midtown Parking District, what has changed here, in the staff report, it showed that there were 57 spaces that will be utilized for the restaurants and the 1-bedroom and the banks and the office. It's actually 48. And the reason is because in the Midtown Parking District, instead of a restaurant being required to have 1 for each 200 square feet of floor area, which is in any other LB2, this particular parking district allows for 1 for each 400. And because of that, the restaurant is required to have 8 parking spaces, and the patios are required to have 4 parking spaces, which equates to a number of 48 parking spaces, and the parking lot actually has 56. Now, again, the restaurants are not included in the special use permit, but they are here just for an example. If there was any retail use that was requested to go here, zoning would check to make sure that the parking requirements were met, and if they were not, the use would not be allowed on the first floor. Number 6, the proposed use shall be designed, sited, and landscaped properly. And here we have a design that was that went before the ARB at their August 27th meeting. It was a conceptual review. The applicant has not come back before the ARB. Since that time, the ARB had questions about the area shown in white here. They had questions about that and wanted some clarity. Staff is recommending that before this application goes to City Council, that the applicant go back to the ARB and get approval for whatever design he would have. Staff does recommend approval of PCR 24026 because it meets the criteria to approve special use permits, those 6 criteria that I just reviewed. Staff again recommends that the applicant return to the ARB for final approval before submitting PCR 24026 to the City Council. If you have any additional questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Let's give Mr. Phillips an opportunity, since I will forget that he's here. Mr. Phillips, do you have questions for Ms. Griffin?
I only have one question, and that is in the analysis of the second and third floor access to public facilities and so forth. What is the operating assumption of a 400 to 500 square foot dwelling? Is it 1 to 2 occupants? What's the assumption that's used in this analysis?
The assumptions used that there will be 1 person per unit of a studio and 1 for the 1 bedroom.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Griffin? Mr. Hamilton?
So you talked about the parking requirement difference of 200 square feet versus 400 square feet.
Yes.
You know why that exists?
That area, it's the Midtown District. It goes all the way up to Monticello. My thought would be it was to accommodate a mix of uses, and usually in a mixed-use district, you do have parking standards that have been lessened to provide for economic development.
Okay.
Could you go back to the slide where you show the calculation of the parking spaces?
Yes.
Because it is significantly different from that included. And it's not 200 to 400, but it's 100 to 400 square feet in the document, in the staff. So where you say here on the restaurants, the document that was online that I printed out earlier today,
Yes.
it said 1 for each 100 square feet. So you say 31 for the restaurants.
Yes.
And so it's not a 200 to 400, but it's a 100 to 400.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. You're right, it is 100, and that is what is required for the LB2 district or
Okay.
for any restaurant.
Okay.
But specifically in the Midtown Parking District, the requirement is 1 for each 400 square feet.
Okay.
And that is a significant difference, you're correct.
Has anyone done a look-back analysis to see if that's a rational number of parking spaces for a restaurant that's about the size of a good-sized single-family home?
The planning office has not done that since I've been here, which has been 2 years. I don't believe it was done before that.
Then I have one further question about the traffic analysis, the traffic impact analysis. You stated that it wasn't, you determined that it wasn't going to be necessary. And we'll have a lot of conversation about traffic on Matoka and as a cut through to Mount Vernon. I understand why for this project you wouldn't deem that to be necessary, but was again ever a look back done to see whether the impact to the area of the Midtown Row traffic met its expectations or if it had an adverse impact on the surrounding neighborhoods?
No, from my understanding to this point, I think Midtown Road came online in 2021. Since that time, there has not been an analysis of Midtown Road, and the staff report should have stated that the planning director does not feel that a traffic impact analysis is required. However, the zoning ordinance does give the planning commission also the authority to request a traffic impact analysis.
That's all I had.
Ranger? So I suppose, Ms. Griffin, with some unknowns about what the ultimate tenant or tenants will be in the first floor, it doesn't make sense to do a traffic analysis now, does it?
A traffic analysis could be done for retail. It doesn't have to be strictly restaurants. When looking at traffic analysis, they do have broad parameters or broad categories, so it still could be done, would not just be specific for a specific retail, but it would be for retail in general.
And if it's not restaurants, would the parking, would the number of spaces required change if it was some other type of retail?
In this Midtown Parking District, restaurants and bake shops and other retails are included in the same. So regardless of the retail for Midtown Parking District, the one for each 400 square feet is still applicable.
Okay, thank you. I didn't have any other questions for you. The applicant, I believe, is here. Would you like to address? I'll go ahead and open the public hearing and give you the first shot.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. If you could go back to the parking slide, Ms. Griffin. I think there was an error in the math. I think the studio, one bedroom, the restaurant and the patio should equate to 28 spaces required for the project total. Is that correct?
This is just your opportunity to address us. It's not really a Q&A.
No, I understand. And as far as your questions, has anyone looked at the parking requirements in the Midtown area? The City Green property that adjoins the Wells Fargo parcel, I also own, and it has 2 restaurants in it, the Domino's Pizza and the Juan's Taqueria, and that was based on the same parking requirements, 1 per 400, and we have no issues with parking there. Just to let you know about that. This project here, I brought forward to the city, not as a student housing project. That's why I designed the apartments as studios and 1-bedrooms. I hired Cubio Architecture out of Chesapeake and the Mollier Group, who have extensive experience in rehabbing old office buildings and warehouses into Gen Z apartments. And generally, the Generation Z, 30 and under generation, they tend to migrate to studios and 1-bedrooms. That's what they can afford. Right now, 31% of Generation Z folks are still living at home. They cannot afford to move out because of the current housing prices. That's why I chose the type of layout. Originally, I had 2- and 3-bedroom units in the mix, and I chose to change that and make it studios and 1-bedrooms. So this project is not geared towards the student population. The building was purchased in 2012 from Wachovia Bank. They merged with Wells Fargo. Wells Fargo is shutting down branches throughout the country. I felt this would be a good reuse of this building. It's antiquated, built in 1972. It would allow a nice refresh of the building, repurpose, generate sales tax revenue for the city by converting the first floor to retail. And I felt that it fit in well with City Green development next door, and then Midtown Row following City Green. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about the project, any questions that folks might have here that they have concerns about the project. Also, if I may approach, I have some pictures of what was on the City Green property before I developed that, if you'd like to see those.
Sure.
Drug addicts and prostitutes were living there. Palm Reader.
Mr. Flores, if you could speak in the microphone when you're talking so that the minutes can reflect what you're saying. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for sharing those in lieu of a PowerPoint.
Yeah, the property was blighted. I worked with Mayor Clyde Hallman, Chief of Police, Jack Tuttle, city manager at the time, to redevelop that parcel. It was it housed, unfortunately, drug addicts, prostitutes, and it was very unsightly. It was a big problem for the city. And it took me several years to get that property redeveloped. And it's turned out to be a very nice project, and we keep it nice and tidy. And I think it's been a plus for the city. So I just wanted you to see what next door was and what it turned into. So I'd like to revitalize this building and spruce it up. I think it's an eyesore, and I think it could be turned into something beautiful. So I hope that y'all feel the same way. Like I said, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, sir. You can sit down. We'll move on to the next speakers. I have three speaker cards. The first is Catherine Allport.
I'm Catherine Allport. I live at 115 Matoka Court. I think as a city resident, we are in a difficult dilemma. The college is not housing its students and no longer has any intention of trying to, and the city is left to pick up the slack. The investors and landlords are benefiting from the college decisions. Some landlords have refused to cooperate with the city efforts to work on programs that might improve student housing in the city and help preserve family neighborhoods. This is not true of all landlords. On Matoka Court, we're very fortunate. We have some excellent landlords. But now we have a vacant building available to house students, and I don't understand how it would be possible for a student to be refused housing there if they were willing to pay the rent. So I'm going to assume, based upon our experience with most other buildings, there will be student tenants. This building, if students choose to live there, is not taking away a family home in a neighborhood, so that's an advantage. But what will the impact be on the surrounding neighborhood, the nearby neighborhood? I'd like to address the traffic questions, and I'm glad that you all have asked those. If you live on a student street, you know that some students come to school with a car at the beginning of the year, and it sits in their driveway or on their street until they go home again, whenever that is. Other students come, and in the morning they're going out in their car for an 8 o'clock class. They come back, they go back for lunch, they go back for a 2 o'clock class, and in the evening they go back to the library or an event on campus. It's very hard to capture that in a usual traffic study. And our neighbors have tried to capture the traffic on Matoka Court over our last week. There are students who drive to the college multiple times a day, back and forth, creating a lot of traffic. In addition to the student traffic on Matoka, we are a cut-through street, which is common in our city. But Matoka is a very important cut-through. It is the safest and probably the only safe route for city children to ride their bikes to Berkeley School and Blair School. In addition, there are children who live on Matoka Court who not only cycle to those schools, but also cycle to Matthew Whaley. So we have groups of students each morning and afternoon going in two directions down the street. When the bank was active and the upstairs was filled at the bank, the intersections, three exits and entrances coming into Matoka Court, could be a very trafficky, dangerous place. There will be increased traffic on Matoka unless the city makes some accommodations. In the Planning Department report, in the preparation, they discussed that this is an active pedestrian bicycling vehicular area. The transition of this building that has taken years, it has been empty, partially empty for a long time, especially the top 2 floors, barely used, to student housing and one-floor business will dramatically increase the active traffic in that area. More than the Planning Department, I think, recognizes in their reports and calculations. We need to protect a safe route for our younger students as well as all persons on their bikes and who are walking. And this is the route particularly for students, young students. Despite the fact that I worry about this and also whether the applicant will be a good provider of some of the environmental issues that surround this, I do recognize that this is an opportunity and a potential to provide better housing for some of our students as opposed to the current housing that they're in. And the building could be put to worse use, as we saw when the applicant turned the old cleaners into the vape store. But if the city is to be the provider of student housing, the City Council, Codes and Compliance, the Planning Commission, the Architectural Review Board must step up with better ideas of how to keep the city in balance, being a beautiful, welcoming, safe setting for all, our transient visitors, students, our businesses, including student landlords, and our tax-paying residents and their families. We have been sliding into this imbalance for quite a while. The pace has picked up, and it is time for the responsible authorities of the city to look at this in a very serious manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Alport. Mr. Ken White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, and everybody in attendance here today. Good afternoon to you. My name is Ken White. I live at 112 Matoka Court. I purchased this house 30 years ago. I've lived there. I love our city. The reason I purchased a house to live here in the city was my house forever. You can't look at my house and not say, I don't love my house. It was an old house. It doesn't look old anymore. It looks preserved and it looks wonderful. Well, I was in agreement at the time why I would buy a house in the city, because the city was pretty much in alignment with my vision of what the future would be for our city. As a great place to live, they had good ordinances, building restrictions. They were all pretty much in line with what I thought would be great for our little city. Well, it hasn't worked out that way for me very well. I border with the present City Green property. Now, the truth is, yes, back then, the previous owners of that land parcel actually used my property as a dumping ground. They dumped everything, any buildings, they dumped it on my property. So when I bought the property 30 years ago, I had to clean up all that at my expense. And to prevent any continued dumping, I erected a fence with a city permit and a license and inspection, and it was effective, not old and rickety. So when the development came along, what occurred right off the bat, they tore my fence down. And since then, I've had to deal with dumping of tree trimmings in the City Green, all sorts of litter, and just recently a dumping of an old tree that was moved, dumped onto my property. And of course, then that brings me to another thing, is the waterfall in the back. And now this is what happens when it rains, and the drain system for the parking lot is not maintained. I just want to play this real quick. That's what happens. That's not Water Country USA. It's not a water TV, it's my backyard. Water flowing over the hill down the ravine causing erosion. So, when these issues occurred, I reported them to the city, and they were sympathetic, but they told me they were powerless to do much about it, telling me it's a matter for the civil courts. Well, that means you have to go and hire a lawyer and do all that. Well, I'm not made of money. I don't have deep pockets. With that said, though, I do wish to say I'm very appreciative of the many city employees that actually did do their best to help me with this issue, and they were really good and helpful. Well, the Matoka Court neighborhood is slowly being squeezed in all directions, if you can't get that from everybody that's here. We feel like we're being squeezed. We were a neighborhood, and now we're just plain squeezed. An increased density on our street from the housing population, it has increased with the students, nothing against students, and the number of vehicles per household are making our street essentially a single lane at times. You have to be very careful. Anybody who lives there knows you have to be careful. Now, the other day I was counting cars, and I almost witnessed a head-on collision because of that. So people are playing chicken. And we are a cut-through, of course, for Richmond Road and Monticello. But the interesting thing is we've always had traffic through that road. We had hospital. We didn't see that number of traffic coming through. But ever since Midtown, we've seen that grow greatly in our neighborhood. Now, the new usage of the 106 Richmond Road property, in my opinion, is just going to add more density to an extremely busy intersection. We've heard talk about Richmond Road and Matoka. I walk it every day. I know how bad it is. I witness pedestrians, cars coming from all areas. It's difficult, and I have to cross the road. It's even more difficult because there's no crosswalk. So I think everything that we're going to do is just going to further strangle Matoka Court, and we will experience overcrowded buildings. I know we say one person per unit, 11 units. Let's just say, and we assume, which we all know what assume means sometimes in another definition, we can assume one, but we can also assume that there might be two people. And if some people, like most families, they have 2 cars, now you've added 22 cars for 11 units. That's only if there's 2. That's a minimum. It could be 3. Who knows? So I just don't think that parking lot and the building are adequate for that kind of density. So I don't know how they came up with the number of 11, not 10 or 9, but I don't know. There's got to be a reason. Well, not to say ill things about the development and the developer, but none of these issues that occur with our property development will get addressed, I don't think. And I say this from experience because I've experienced a development that knows no boundaries, no apologies, and no respect for my property. Thank you very much for listening to my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. White, for being here today. Mr. Bill Dell is the next speaker card.
Good afternoon. My name is Bill Dell. I live at 219B, as in boy, Harrison Avenue. And contrary to what the address might indicate, it is a single-family home. It's not an apartment. It's one that I bought about 5 months ago after having to move from North Henry, where I was residing and renting from Colonial Williamsburg for 8 years with my wife. I've lived in the city for over 24 years, starting in the summer of 1999, and for all of those years, the city has talked of a desire and a goal to encourage more single-family residences in the city of Williamsburg. Unfortunately, particularly some of the activity that I have been trying to do, and mainly because of the William and Mary Real Estate Foundation and outside investment in purchasing every available parcel of land that has not, just hasn't come to fruition because there's no land available, for individuals like me that are coming in and trying to buy and establish a single-family home. There's a constant and a continuing battle for the single-family residents to maintain the few neighborhoods that remain single-family occupancy. And don't get me wrong, I'm not opposed to residential development. But I am opposed to allowing multifamily development in areas that could have helped attain the goal of single-family occupancy in the city of Williamsburg. In all honesty, we just don't need to have to deal with the traffic, the parking, the safety, the lack of upkeep of multifamily, high-density development and construction. Now, I've always been told that if you are against something, you better come up with a plan to fix it. Well, I do have a plan to fix it. May not like what it is, but it is something that would, number one, continue the goal of trying to get single-family development in the city, and also would provide owners of the property good revenue-bearing investment. Why not tear down the building? It's not in keeping with the development of other properties in the city of Williamsburg anyway. And why not use that as an opportunity to take that land that the existing bank is on and the parking behind it, and work with the city to develop a proposal for the land across the street where the old motel used to be, and use that rather than a multifamily area, build 3, 4, possibly 5 single-family homes, which would allow individuals to come in and buy those homes and bring additional people into the city of Williamsburg. It's something that could be done, and it's something I think that would not have the resistance of the population to these multiple family type developments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dell. Appreciate you being here today. Dr. Cranbuell, I believe you had something to say. You were halfway to the podium earlier, and I cut you off, so I'll give you the next shot.
David Cranbuell. I live at 201 Harrison Avenue. I've lived here for 62 years of my life. And I regret to say that in the last decade or so, we've gone on a downhill slope. I moved here, as I think all of us did, because of the wonderful single-family neighborhoods. And I live on a street which is dominated by 100-year-old houses, and the houses on Matoka Court are also approaching that level. They certainly are quite old. And what's happened is we have a real problem with the college, as just been described. They're buying up that ever since they created the real estate foundation. You see year after year, 1, 2, 3 properties, commercial and housing. They're extending the university into our downtown area. There was a wonderful shop for buying jewelry. It's now administrative college. And there doesn't seem to be any stop. And I understand their goal. Their goal is to do it as cost effective as possible, but it's being done at the expense of our community, commercially and residentially. The simple point is, thank goodness, in one sense for Williamsburg, that there's a decline in the growth of our population, and that unless the management can't afford to keep within their own budget, they're going to take more students. But I'm assuming they can do that, so the college population will be the same. But the fraction of people living off campus is a beautiful first talk, gave all kinds of statistics about how many homes that could be used for young people and whatever are just being taken over by students. Simply, nothing wrong with the students, it's that the college isn't providing the kind of housing that they should, and they own a huge portion of our property. So there's no property shortage. So we need to put the pressure on the college to do that. Okay, now, this thing, in my mind, needs to be seriously delayed and studied. There are all kinds of questions. And I know Demetrius well, and I respect him a lot. But he has a lot of properties and a lot to manage. The property he described that's next door has created a lot of problems for neighbors. I live down the street, and Bill is in his property between us. I sent you some pictures. It's nothing close to the way Mr. Granger manages his properties, or I own the property with my partner at 206 Harrison. We bought that property months after he bought that property on Harrison Avenue. I challenge you to look at our property, 206 Harrison. It's as good as the multi-million-dollar house landscaping across the street, which, by the way, when it went up for sale and they wanted to sell it for $1.5 million, we learned that the real estate agent said, no, because of the property that I sent you pictures of, because of it being within one unit away from it, it had to be reduced by a minimum of $150,000, probably $200,000. So the point is, when you get so much to manage and you have other people managing it, it gets to be complicated. Now let's look at this house. So I don't have any confidence in how it'll turn out. And there's plenty of evidence that there'll be lots of problems. We're going to have one person per unit. Are we not going to have two? Or maybe even three? I mean, when students want to do things economically, they're going to do whatever they can do. Do we have an enforcement mechanism for having only one, so that it might be competitive for people on the outside? We need that. We need some provisos built into this thing so that there will only be one person, because as soon as you go to two, you could have 3 cars, and you could sell your visitor pass to students, and so the number of cars who could be there, if there's more than one person in these units, is 2 to 3 times, minimum 2, possibly 3 times. So what rules do we have for that? I mean, and I won't go into the traffic, you're going to deal with that, but we have very poor mechanisms for enforcement, and until we have some kind of guarantees that we have procedures, which it's a special use permit, so I'd be happy to work with Demetrius to see if we can work out something with our wonderful planning commissioner, that we have inspections so there's only one person per unit if it were to go forward. And then a whole lot of, well, one major issue would be solved, but until we do that and discuss it, I mean, all kinds of multipliers are going to occur, and it's not going to be good. And then of course there's student parties, and I won't go into all that, but as soon as you start having a space for students where it's filled with students, I mean, because the college again doesn't provide ability to have parties, I mean, they're in the neighborhoods. Well, at any rate, I think the historic houses, of which Mr. Granger owns one on our street, which we're proud to have him, and his mom and his dad. Of course, his dad's no longer with us, which is sad, but I mean, we want to preserve this whole area, in Matoka Court's another street. It needs to be preserved. And so we need to put this on hold. Possibly, I think it's possible to work with Demetrius, and some ideas have come up. And let's make sure that whatever we approve, we can enforce what we're approving, and that all of our projections are real. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Granville, for being here. Anyone else would like to come forward and, yep, please do. You'd state your name and address for the clerk.
Hi, my name's Cole Fairbanks. I live at 111 Matoka Court, which is almost directly across from the Wells Fargo building. And I'm a native of Williamsburg. I recently, actually was born 100 yards away at the hospital, which is now the School of Education. And I've been living in New York. I recently moved back to take a job with the College of William Mary. And I've been really excited I've only been in owner since July, but I've been excited to fix up the house and make it a home, and also excited to share where I live with a lot of my colleagues at William Mary, who frequently ask me, oh, where do you live? Oh, I live on Matoka. Oh, where is that? Oh, you go down Richmond, you take a left. Oh, you mean the cut-through street? You know, I've heard this not once, not twice, multiple times. And it's true, you know, if you sit on my doorstep, you'd see, like about 8 or 9 a.m. on a busy school day, you'd see about 25 cars within 5 minutes. And that's before you see the bikes and the students walking to class. You know, why is it relevant to the Wells Fargo building? It's relevant because of the traffic and public safety. You know, if you also sit on my doorstep, you'll see that there's an entrance and an exit coming from the Wells Fargo building onto Matoka, not Richmond Road. And you realize that if right now the situation's bearable with the cut-through street, but if all of a sudden there's 22 to 48 cars there, you're going to have this incredible bottleneck on the corner of Matoka and Richmond, which on a good day is going to make it unbearable for residents to get in and out of the neighborhood, and on a bad day is, going to be a collision or a serious injury, or even a fatality, probably within 3 years. So in short, I would say that in the long term, I think the residents, based on the conversations I've had with my new neighbors, want their street back from Monticello. But in the short term, at the very least, if the project's approved, it would be nice to have an entrance and an exit for this commercial property on Richmond Road, a commercial road for a commercial property where residents could get in and out, and you could prevent, a kid from getting hit on a bike. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fairbanks. Anyone else? Not seeing any hands or movement toward the podium, I'll go ahead and close the open forum and ask commissioners for input. Mr. Phillips, did you have any comments?
I do not have any comments at this time. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. Hamilton?
So with regard to occupancy, is it possible to put some occupancy limitations in the special use permit? If they're put in there, are they enforceable?
So with a special use permit, you can put certain conditions in. In reviewing the state code, there is a code section that says that 2 persons per bedroom is presumed to be reasonable, and that restrictions can be placed on resident or occupancy based on that number. As far as the city code is concerned, there's also the 4-person rule. No more than 3 unrelated persons can reside in a dwelling unit.
So I infer from that it would not be possible to legally possible to put a constraint in the permit of 1 person per unit.
Not for a 1-bedroom unit, and I think that for a studio, you run into issues of marital status. If a married person wanted to reside in a unit with their spouse, then that could create issues as well.
Okay. On the traffic, I guess we've heard some things today that really are kind of bigger picture issues for the city as a whole with regard to who's living where and what's the college doing versus what the city is doing and the general character of the traffic situation. And for the most part, I can't see how we can deal with those issues in this meeting because we have a specific request that's rather narrow compared to those issues. Tevye, do you think, after the various inputs we've heard today, that it would merit pursuing some sort of traffic study to better nail down exactly what's going on in this area before we go forward?
Yes, sir. Based on the emails that we've received or the Planning Commission's received and I've read, and also some of the comments, I do think it is warranted to have a traffic impact analysis done. That's something that the director can request, myself, or the Planning Commission.
Okay. So with the final comments, the level of occupancy proposed for the building, how does that fall into the requirements for inspection of rental units?
So the state code does require if a property is in a rental inspection district, and this property is within a rental inspection district, if it's multifamily, if there's 10 or more units, then an inspection can be done, and that inspection can be no more than 10% of those units. So in this case, if it was approved for 10 or more units, one of those apartments could be inspected. Under 10, none of those apartments would be inspected.
Okay. Pass the gavel.
Okay. Cleveland?
Okay, so a lot of the comments that we received had less to do with this specific application than with concerns about landlord maintenance and cleaning of the properties. And that seems to me to be an issue. The remedy for that is to take all of the complaints to the Codes and Compliance Department of the city, and it's incumbent upon the city to enforce those cleaning and maintenance issues. But of greater concern to me is the same thing Mr. Hamilton mentioned, the traffic where Matoka is being used as a cut-through to get to Mount Vernon. And my question earlier was with respect to, since the development of Midtown Row, how much more has the use of this area as a cut-through, how much has it increased? Because I can conceive of people turning out of Midtown Row and cutting through Mount Vernon to Matoka to get up to Richmond Road to avoid the Richmond Road intersection. I also believe this situation is going to get much worse when the construction of the roundabout starts on Lafayette, Monticello, and Richmond Road. And so it's incumbent upon the city to do a study of where we are today, how is that area being used, and how many of those are quote-unquote residential traffic generators, and how many in fact are cut-through generators, because it's just going to get worse, at least for however many years duration the construction of the roundabout is.
Thank you. Mr. Granger? Nope. Okay, let me just go ahead and say that so many of the comments about William & Mary and the students, as I was walking out of the business school this afternoon, the Board of Visitors was just assembling for their I guess quarterly meeting. They were going to be meeting over there, and I wish we could have all gotten on a van and gone over there and had them listen to all of this, because it's so important that they do understand the city's the struggles, and I'm not always sure that the BOV completely gets the impact on all of us who live here and really care about this place. And as those of you who come to these meetings know, that my initial approach is always thinking about whether this specific application, if approved, but ultimately by City Council, is going to make Williamsburg a better place or not. And the goal of City Council in this context is to pull more students out of those single-family houses where they are currently living, and many of them are substandard and have condition issues, and you all know which ones I'm sure that I'm talking about. And one way to do that was by building Midtown Row. Another way to do that was by adding a few residences that were originally commercial to Midtown Row. And it seems to me that this is another opportunity to add a few more opportunities for students to move out of the single-family houses that they're living in and into a building that already exists, that's already it's a commercial building. It's underperforming as a commercial building, and it seems to me that if we're trying to move students out of the single-family houses, a great way to do that is by increasing the supply of good new attractive housing, and as the applicant said, sort of Gen Z, but leading up to that, and even if it's not all students, it would be perhaps some students. The traffic thing, I think, is critically important to look at, and I'm certainly not going to discount that. I had 2 classes today at William & Mary of about 60 students each, and I asked them, if you lived there would you be driving in and out? And they said uniformly, so they said no, they wouldn't be driving in and out. They would be on their scooters and their bikes and all of that, because if you've tried to park on William & Mary's campus anytime recently, you know that parking, I mean, going 2 or 3 times a day, you're probably not going to find a parking place each of those times. With regard to the sort of policing of the parking and all of that, the applicant is going to have a business or 2 businesses on the first floor that will require parking for those businesses. And I don't think that if tenants on the second and third floor have 2 or 3 or 4 cars parked in the parking lot, I don't think the landlord is going to be particularly thrilled about that, because it's going to be interfering with his commercial tenants' opportunities to have customers and employees there. So I think that that probably is going to be, as far as that goes, is going to be self-regulating. And the same with the condition of the property, that the commercial tenants are going to want that property to be maintained so that their customers will want to come there. And I certainly understand the points about other properties that are related, similar owner, same owner, and maybe the same managers. But as Ms. Liebel said, you know, that there are other ways to handle that. It's unfortunate that the Commonwealth of Virginia, many people don't understand that cities just don't have the kind of power that they do in other states. In another state where I lived 15 years ago, I was on a code enforcement board that had the power to impose fines and to impose liens on property. I was also on a nuisance abatement board, so that people who came and said, "Oh, there's too much noise," you could also fine and do all that. Virginia just does, the Commonwealth of Virginia just does not allow the cities that kind of enforcement power. So you know, as much as I understand all that, I know it's frustrating. This commission and the city as a whole just doesn't have the opportunity to police and to enforce the way we wish. I think sometimes that it did. With all of that, I'm going to ask, now I want to propose a motion, but I do want to recommend the traffic impact analysis as part of it. And there were some staff recommendations. So I'm going to make a motion, and correct me if I'm wrong with the language on this, but I'm going to make a motion to recommend approval of PCR 24-026 with the staff recommendations and with the proviso that a traffic impact analysis be completed.
I would like to only modify that a little bit, in that is, depending on the outcome of the traffic impact analysis, that the city come up with a resolution to mitigate the cut-through quality. We all know that College Terrace has a cutoff that you cannot cut through from Brooks to College Terrace. And is there something like that the city could be doing to prevent people from using that corridor?
I don't think the assistant city attorney will confirm this, but I don't think we have the authority to be that global with this. Am I correct, sir?
That's correct.
Okay. That would be a solution, but that's a city council-driven solution.
Right.
That's
Okay.
Separate and apart from this, right? So that motion. So my motion then will.
Gotcha.
And no dispute about that, but I think that's beyond this motion. So that motion is sitting there waiting for a second.
I ask a question about the motion?
Of course.
So what happens to the decision? Suppose you have a really bad outcome from the traffic study. How does that change the approval of what's been proposed?
It would not change the if this body chooses to approve with a recommendation that the applicant get a traffic impact analysis, that would just be a recommendation. So
if we make such a recommendation, who's obligated to do the work?
it would be on the applicant, but the city code says that the planning commission can require a traffic impact analysis. So if that's the desire of the body, then I I think another action should be taken.
Okay, so that's what I thought that motion was going to do. So that motion is not going to do that. So I will withdraw that motion and ask you specifically, should there be a motion to table the application and to require
I think postponing would be the proper motion you can either postpone this matter until the traffic impact analysis is submitted to the planning department. You can postpone it until the next meeting of the body, or those are essentially the two motions. If you want to require before approval of the matter a traffic analysis, the planning director or the planning commission are the only two bodies per code that can require a traffic impact analysis.
Okay, so then we would move to postpone making a recommendation on this application until a traffic impact analysis has been submitted, and then that would come back to us?
And that would, yes. So you can either choose a date certain, or you can choose a condition certain. So if you want it to come back to the next meeting, you can make that motion, or you can determine that the special use permit is not complete because it does not have a traffic analysis. And so you can say once the applicant has provided it, it would have to be re-advertised and go on the next meeting after it's been provided.
Okay, so I'll go ahead and make the motion myself then. I move that we postpone making a recommendation on PCR 24-026 until such time as a traffic impact analysis has been submitted as part of the application. Will that work, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that motion is now sitting there waiting for a second.
I second that motion.
Aye.
Aye.
Abstain?
Aye.
Okay. Was he muted?
Mr. Phillips?
No, I'm not muted. I can't hear. No one's asked me.
My mic was not on, I apologize. Mr. Phillips?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That dispenses with PCR 24-026 for today. That gets us to PCR 24-030 and 031, and I believe, Ms. Griffin, you're going to address those at the same time in the same presentation, is that right?
Yes, I will. I apologize for this. In my mind, I was thinking, let's do the one that may be the easiest first, and that's why I did these first.
As long as the slides are entertaining, that's fine.
They should be entertaining enough. Okay, here we go. The city has received a request from WADA for a text amendment and also a special use permit. I'll first go over the text amendment and then we'll go right into the special use permit. WADA received approval from City Council in January of this year to operate and expand the public transportation and maintenance facility with the approval of a special use permit. And in December of 2023, the Planning Commission approved the site plan. Soon after City Council's approval, WADA solicited bids for the work that would include new areas for administration, operations, and for maintenance. And all of this work would be conducted with personnel on site in the building, with the schedule for relocation from one place to the other while work was being conducted. Unfortunately, no bids were received. To mitigate liability from contractors having to work around personnel, WADA is requesting temporary buildings and associated temporary structures to maintain operations while construction is underway. WADA strongly believes that this move will help garner responses from contractors. So the text amendment is in section 21-34 of chapter 21, which is our zoning ordinance. Specifically, it would add temporary buildings and associated temporary structures to facilitate construction to uses permitted with a special use permit in the limited industrial district for no more than 3 years. This does say 2 years. In our ordinance that you'll see that we have, we were thinking 2 years. WADA has come back and asked that it be 3 years. Actually, that was in their application. Our talks, it was initially 2 years. They want to make sure, in case there's any more hiccups with the bid process, that they add an additional year. And staff has no issue with that. So we would recommend that it would be for 3 years. Temporary structures are currently allowed as construction trailers. So if there is a development coming up, we do allow construction trailers by right. Also by special use permit, temporary classroom facilities are allowed. So the limited industrial district are these two areas here. On the bottom is the WADA site, and on the top is the distribution warehouse for CW. Around that, you have museum support. You also have the RS2 conditional zoning, and you have the ED conditional zoning, which is the quarter path mixed use area. The comprehensive plan designation for the WADA site is shown in the darker blue here. That designation is public and semi-public. This land use category is generally assigned to institutional buildings and lands, and as a quasi-government entity, this designation is consistent with WADA's organizational structure. The construction of new facilities is also a part of the comprehensive plan. It is talked about in Chapter 12, pages 12 through 23. Staff recommends approval of PCR 24-030. We believe it should be approved because it's in keeping with the zoning district and comprehensive plan designation. It's limited in scope, and it provides specific time frame in which the buildings would have to be removed. And just to provide clarity for that, the SUP would have the 3 years associated with it. The zoning ordinance amendment would not have any years at all. It would just say temporary facilities and temporary structures. So now specifically for the special use permit, the owner, of course, is WADA. The location is 7239 Pocahontas Trail. It's around 13.3 acres. Land use designation and the zoning I just spoke about. This is what they want to do. Again, the year is 3 years instead of 2. They would utilize temporary buildings and associated temporary structures necessary to facilitate construction of their public transportation and vehicle maintenance facilities. It would include office spaces, temporary mechanical facilities, temporary storage facilities, and temporary fueling facilities. The 6 criteria, comprehensive plan, in harmony with that, in harmony with the intent of the zoning district, and will not impede the character of adjacent properties, neighborhoods, or any proposed or existing development. We believe it meets all 3 of those criteria. We believe the same for the actual building. Temporary buildings, we don't think makes any difference, and we're still recommending approval. Here we have compatibility with the comprehensive plan, the zoning district, adequately serviced by essential public services. This will be adequately served. The temporary uses actually will not remove any public essential services. They will have the same water lines, the same gas lines, all of that would be the same. Nothing as a part of this has changed at all from the permanent buildings. It will not result in the destruction or loss or damage of any ecological or historic areas here. And then will it be designed, sited, and landscaped not to hinder or discourage development? The design is very minimal. It just has temporary facilities, and I'll show you the site plan in a few moments. It will be sited on the same property, and there's no landscaping associated with the temporary structures. Here is a site plan. The Site Plan Review Committee did review this at their October 16th meeting, and the Site Plan Review Committee recommended moving this forward to the November Planning Commission. This gives you a key of exactly what you're looking at here, the site plan. The proposed temporary facilities are the areas in the striped red. The temporary office and storage spaces are in the blue. The fluid storage space is in the purple. The orange is the fueling space. The designated POV parking spaces are in the green. The designated bus parking spaces are in the yellow, and in the contractor laydown area. And as you can see, these temporary facilities really move all construction out of the way, all of the personnel out of the way of the construction. Staff recommends approval of PCR 24031 because it meets the criteria to approve special use permits. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. We do have someone here from WADA to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Mr. Phillips, any questions for Ms. Griffin or for WADA staff?
I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any from the podium? Okay, I'm going to do these on separate motions. Is there a motion to recommend approval of PCR 24-030?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Mr. Phillips?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. And is there a motion to recommend approval of PCR 24-031?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Mr. Phillips?
Aye.
Okay, and that brings us to the site plan and subdivision, which is Ms. Griffin has already explained to us. So I'll just ask, is there a motion to recommend approval of SPR 24-022?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Mr. Phillips?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We don't have unfinished business. New business, we'll skip the informational items for today. I see nothing on the public hearings for December 18th. Do we think that's going to change? Are there things that might be pending?
It will not change.
Not change. Okay, there we are. Anything else we need to discuss? All right, thank you. We're adjourned.